Hey y'all, I'm Educator Emily, and today is the last video of Spooky Month. Now, for the past two videos, we've talked about scavengers, right? They've been our focus. So we've talked about what a scavenger is and some examples of scavengers from all over the world. And then in our video that we put up in the middle of the month, we talked about how scavengers are able to eat dead and decaying flesh without getting sick. In this video, we are not going to be talking about scavengers, so we're changing it up a little bit. Instead, we're going to be talking about what determines whether or not an organism becomes a fossil after it dies or not. So we get to learn all about the wonderful, icky world of either decomposition or fossilization, which is arguably much less gross. So what is the difference between fossilization and decomposition? Decomposition is the process in which organic matter is then broken down into smaller parts or broken down into simpler organic materials. Fossilization, however, replaces that organic material with minerals. So the organism basically becomes rock in fossilization. So what determines whether or not after you die you will become a rock or just break down into the environment? Well, a lot of it has to do with where you die. So let's talk about fossils first. And first of all, fossils are the remnants of previously living things that have been preserved in stone. Now, the fossils that we think of when we think of fossils, right, when we think of going into a museum and seeing a giant T-Rex skeleton, those fossils that we are thinking of are fossils formed through a process known as permineralization. And that's the process we're going to be talking about most in depth today. The bodies of living things, whether that's the thigh bone or the femur in a dinosaur, the trunk of a tree, or the shell of a clam, all have these little teeny tiny pores in it, kind of like the pores in your skin. And unless it's been filtered or processed, water often is hard, meaning it has minerals inside of it. When water moves in or around a deceased specimen, it's carrying all of these minerals with it and exposing the specimen to these minerals. When the water evaporates, it leaves these minerals behind, and these minerals take up residences in the pores, spaces, tissues, and cells of the deceased organism. Over time, this creates layers of mineralization that starts to replace the organic matter that once made up this living thing. And it turns that deceased specimen into a stone fossil, which then, if we're lucky, maybe we'll dig up in a couple million years. Now, keep in mind, the process of going from an organic dead individual to an inorganic stone fossil does not happen overnight. This is something that takes thousands, if not millions of years to do. Fossilization in this way, through permineralization, works best if the organism dies in a moist environment and is rapidly covered by sediment to reduce its exposure to the elements. Some other ways that fossilization can happen, not via permineralization, include being buried under snow or ice or being frozen in permafrost, or being trapped in amber. These two methods of fossilization preserve soft tissue and even the colors of what these living things used to be. It also preserves fur and muscle, which can give paleontologists a more complete image of what this animal looked like when it was alive. Because often this soft tissue is lost in the process of permineralization. But altogether, paleontologists and other people who study deep time can learn a plethora of information from a fossil, whether that's a wasp trapped in amber, a cave bear frozen in permafrost, or a T-Rex that's been fossilized via permineralization. Obviously though, not every animal that dies gets fossilized, right? Some get eaten by scavengers or carnivores before fossilization can even begin. Some die in conditions where fossilization isn't likely to happen, and some just get worn away by the elements and decompose. So, if a specimen doesn't get eaten all the way and then pooped out of the butt of a carnivore or a scavenger, what happens to it? Invertebrates, so animals like you or me or a hyena or a pig or a lion or a mountain goat, there's a distinct process of decomposition that can be clumped into 5 different stages. These stages of decay are the fresh stage, the bloat stage, the active decay stage, the advanced decay stage, and skeletonized remains. The super spooky thing is that how we know a lot about decomposition, and especially how we know about the process of human decomposition, comes from scientists who work on these places called body farms, where they literally just like throw dead bodies out and watch them decompose. This stuff helps forensic scientists and other ecologists as well, just to learn about the decomposition process. But how spooky is it to work on a body farm? I kind of want to do it. In the fresh stage, nothing super icky has happened. This organism has just died. But because the heart is no longer pumping oxygenated blood throughout the rest of its body, normal bodily functions that require oxygen have ceased. And anaerobic cellular respiration, or cell functions and movements without oxygen, start to begin. The body temperature of the organism will drop, and this is the phase in which we see rigor mortis, or that characterized stiffness of a carcass or corpse, begin to set in. So next come the stages of bloat and active decay, and this is really where all the icky stuff starts to happen. So in bloat, the body balloons up. We're going to talk about exactly why that happens. But at this point in bloat and active decay, the bacteria have really reached their peak of their anaerobic respiration. During bloat, the bacteria that were housed in the living body and contained within the gut kind of start to eat their way out of the gut and spill over into the rest of the body and begin this process known as self-digestion. During this process of anaerobic respiration, the bacteria produce gases as a byproduct, which account for the ballooning that you see in the bodies, the disgusting smells that are accompanied by them, and even the real spooky post-mortem death farts and burps that might come out of a dead animal. Now, during this active decay stage that comes after bloat, the body begins to be colonized by insects. So this is when you start to see flies and maggots and all these other animals living on and in and around this decaying corpse. As these maggots and bugs are feeding on the corpse and the anaerobic bacteria are self-digesting it, a lot of nutrients and chemicals are leaking out of the corpse into the surrounding vegetation. Now, one of these nutrients is nitrogen, which is a normal element to find in the environment. However, too high of levels of nitrogen in such a small concentrated area, which is what happens when a body decomposes, it can actually kill the vegetation around the corpse, turn it black or yellow. Now, the vegetation can also die for other reasons, such as some of the maggots that will feed on dead and decaying bodies produce antibiotics as their byproduct, and these will then kill the vegetation around the body. So that's often why you will see dead and decaying vegetation around where an animal has recently died. Now, after the stages of bloat and active decay, the body begins to enter this phase of advanced decay. This is where the skin blackens and hardens over the bones and really tight, kind of looks like a weird gross jerky, and the process of putrefaction is almost complete. Scavengers may still feed on the carcass at this point, but dry meat jerky isn't going to give them a lot of nutrients, and it also isn't going to be easy for them to eat. So often scavengers, unless they're extremely desperate, will not feed on carcasses at this point. And last but not least, you have the final stage of decomposition, which is skeletonized remains. These remains are the bones and the fur of whatever animal has passed. Often these bones and fur will get bleached by the sun and they will turn white. So there you have it. The process of decomposition is grosser, but just as cool as the process of fossilization. What a perfect way to wrap up Spooky Month. If you don't already follow Zoo Montana on social media or subscribe to our YouTube channel, why don't you go ahead and do that right now. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram using the handles that you see on the screen. Now, remember, stay safe, stay spooky, and have a safe and fun Halloween. Bye, guys.